questions. I'm here to introduce you to our first talk in a series of conversations on privacy and security, topics that have emerged as one of the primary themes of the 2014 event. There is certainly a variety of valid opinions on these topics, and our goal is that at South by Southwest, we can have a forum for a range of different voices to be heard and an opportunity to foster constructive debate. Julian Assange has been a formative leader from one angle of this debate, encouraging the use of technology as a tool of empowerment. The WikiLeaks founder has served as a trailblazer in the fight against censorship and used the site to publish several million documents since its founding in 2006. He asserts that the truth should be available to all.
She's just introducing.
Passionately in the
I didn't know if you knew who she was, though.
Power. Benjamin Palmer of the Barbarian Group will interview Julian in this conversation of the advantages and abuses of the digital age and the future of democracy. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Benjamin Palmer, who will cue the live video chat with Julian from London.
It keeps going.
Hi guys. So we're gonna call Bruce Willis right now.
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for having me here. We're just gonna dial in on Skype. Thought we were already dialed in. So I'm from Barbarian Group in New York. We're a digital creative agency, and I'm here at South by Southwest for the same reason that you guys all are, is to talk about what's going on in the digital world. And one of the most, technical difficulties, of course. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. All right, so Skype is not working. All right, we should be good now. Just calling WikiLeaks. Maybe they're not home. Huh. Do you have a backup Google Hangout? No?
Yeah.
Oh. This was supposed to work. We did test this before, guys. Plugs. We tried turning it off and on again. Looks like WikiLeaks isn't available. Oh, hey, there we go. All right, awesome.
Yeah, funny.
Let's minimize this. Let's mute this. Sometimes it just takes a second, guys. All right. Skype is preferable, so I'm going to mute this. Okay, now we're really doing this. Okay, so we have Julian Assange here live from the Ecuadorian embassy. Can you hear me, Julian? Are you there?
I can hear you, Ben, and I can hear a lot of echo. It sounds like a very big auditorium. I can see you, I can't see the audience.
Huge auditorium.
Okay,
Look at
there's
that.
a lot of people there. It's somewhat intimidating.
All right. Would you prefer the camera on the audience?
I would.
Okay, great. All right, awesome. Well, hello. How's the...
We can see you all, and so can GCHQ.
Great. So, thanks for being here virtually. So how's life in the embassy? I think a lot of people are curious what your day is like. In the last year, you've been in the Ecuadorian embassy in the middle of London. What's your day like?
Yeah. So, well, today has been a bit crazy. I met with Alice Walker this morning, who wrote The Color Purple, who's quite an interesting Black American writer who has been doing some work in Gaza. But how that meeting came about is a bit a bit unusual and it was cancelled and so on. So, okay. So, and then we're getting over the technical difficulties of trying to speak to you, which seems to have worked out at the very last second.
I think we're good. Yeah.
But your question about what life is like for me in this embassy, well, I guess it's something that is of interest to people in that, well, what would you do if you're in a situation where you were confined for 650 days or so in this situation? It is a bit like prison. Arguably, prisoners have got it worse in relation to the restrictions on visitors, for example, and the sort of the level of bureaucracy involved. Most of them are able to get outside, although at any one point in time in the United States, there's some 60,000 people per year in one form of solitary confinement or another, which is a really serious abuse. Those are perhaps the most disenfranchised people of all. Outside the embassy, there's around a dozen police at any point in time. Management, individual police. The UK government has admitted to spending $8 million so far just in the police surveillance of the embassy alone. And it's kind of an interesting signal as to the amount of money that a government is willing to spend to keep its prestige in a situation of international conflict.
So, it seems like just throughout history of nations and things, like spying on your own people and spying on other people is inevitable. It's an inevitable part of governments and power structures. But in the internet age, and because of what you've been doing and other recent leaks, the public perception is quite different now. And it seems like you're ahead of the game a little bit in terms of like dealing with the public versus, say, the NSA in America, who hides their information a little bit and then it's leaked out. What do you think the governments should be doing differently now in terms of interacting with their people?
The development that has happened in the United States and its allies over the last 20 years since the fall of the Soviet Union is a really serious issue. There is now 75% of global military expenditure in one power bloc, NATO, and when you include other US allies, that is about 85%. Just one power bloc. When we talk about these tussles with Russia, Russia is 4% of military expenditure. It is 20 to 1 is spent on NATO versus Russia. So it is practically insignificant and hemmed in at a global level. Why the National Security Agency has had such a problem in its public perception in the United States is that it has grown to be a rogue agency. It has grown unfettered, and as we have moved our lives onto the internet, nearly all our important economic and personal interactions, the things that are even quite dear to us, our interactions with our children and our romantic involvements, the National Security Agency and GCHQ have been sucking all this up, and their ability to store all that information has been doubling every 18 months for the same cost. The amount of information being transmitted has been doubling about every 18 months, whereas the human population has been increasing at a relatively shallow level. You know, it's going to be another 20 years before we get another about 1.5 billion people. So the ability to surveil everyone on the planet is almost there, and arguably will be there within a few years. And to store it all. And that's led to a huge transfer of power from the people who are surveilled upon to those who control the surveillance complex. It's a sort of interesting postmodern version of power. It's not some intelligence agency there in Washington 80% of the National Security Agency's budget goes on private contractors. It is a fluid, postmodern amalgam of different agencies, private contractors, not just the United States, but many of these are transnational, like BAE or Northrop Grumman.
So,
Historically, the National Security Agency has run its PR campaign based on not existing. And when a lot of information came out, thanks to the Edward Snowden revelations, about the functions of the National Security Agency, and everyone was able to see the incredible nervous response by government, the aggressive response, spraying out extradition orders across the world, being involved in downing the President of Bolivia's jet by applying pressure to deny it entry into European airspace, and the rhetoric trotted out by the White House to criticize China or Russia or us. That let everyone see that somehow this was an important element of power, and it had been developed unnoticed to people. And once everyone stood up and took notice of what was going on and started to question how had it come to this? How is it that the internet, which everyone looked upon as perhaps the greatest tool of human emancipation that there had ever been, had been in fact co-opted and was now involved in the most aggressive form of state surveillance that the world has ever seen. And everyone wanted questions. They wanted to know what was going to change, and were these programs legitimate, and were they justified, and were we in fact moving into a sort of new totalitarian world, into a full-blown
I think it's for an hour.
totalitarian dystopia. Totalitarian, not in the sense of Stalin, but totalitarian in the sense that the surveillance is total, that no one can exist outside the state, because everyone is sucked up in their communications to be stored in one state. States trade that information with each other or to private contractors. The National Security Agency's previous PR method was to simply not exist, jokingly referred to as no such agency for many years from those people who were trying to study it. Its response to press reports was to not respond, to try and give no oxygen to reportage on it. But once the reportage had reached above a certain level, the evidence above a certain level, and the White House's actions in trying to crush Edward Snowden and the reporters and the people defending him grew to such volume that it couldn't be ignored, then you needed a different strategy. And the National Security Agency doesn't have that strategy. The Pentagon has that strategy of trotting out soldiers wrapped in flags, trying to demonstrate bravery, having embedded reporters and so on. But the National Security Agency never had that. So to some degree, those people who have been trying for years to call attention to this phenomenon of state overreach, well, we got lucky because we ended up with an opponent that didn't actually have a PR strategy other than to not exist at all.
So, unlike Snowden or Manning, who found themselves in a situation within their job.
Hello, Ben. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Good. No? Yes? Hello? Hello? Have you lost me?
I can't hear you at all, Ben.
Okay.
Can people in the audience, if they can hear me, can they raise their hand?
Yeah, they
Yes,
can hear me.
okay.
Okay, I can ask you a question over text.
Okay, well, I'm a bit notorious for doing this, but I'm going to just try, since I can't hear you, I'm just going to ramble on, unless you can get through.
No? Hello? Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, he can type questions.
I can type questions. Talk about...
Alright, so I wanted to speak about something that has become very obvious to me because of my circumstance and the circumstances of my friends and colleagues. The internet about 4 years ago was a politically apathetic space. I don't know if you can cast your mind back to thinking about it in 2009, early 2010. Yes, there were gradual developments of politicization. We can think of Anonymous, for example, in 2008, and their brief conflict with Scientology. It's a very kind of amateur thing. But whenever you start to engage in conflict, or you, in fact, try and do anything seriously at a sufficient level, eventually you run in to the big state powers. You actually run into the deep state. And our run-in with Pentagon, State Department, with, as a result of our publications, let everyone see that phenomenon. And it's a phenomenon that took place on the internet. It was the first big time in the West where there was a genuine conflict in relation to power and in relation to what people could do in this internet realm. And everyone could see what was going on. In fact, take part of it and live through that period of history. As a result of living through that period of history, there was many people on the internet developed a sense that this space that they had enjoyed, the place where people communicate and come up with ideas and consensus, where all their friends were, their community interface with the regular big power community of what we might say the geriatric world of the old people who are in power, who control the men with guns and control all the money. That spread out in different places in different ways, not just because of our efforts, but others as well, into the Arab Spring, into Occupy movement and so on. And the internet became a political space. And I think that has been the most important transition in the last decade, to see that occurring. And this communication we are having right now is part of the communications revolution leading to political involvement and a new community consensus forming that wasn't otherwise there. On the periphery, on the bleeding edge of that, has been WikiLeaks and its staff as an organization, but it has gone on to include people like Glenn Greenwald, who's also going to be speaking at this event, Edward Snowden, Laura Poitras in Berlin, Jacob Appelbaum, Sarah Harrison. Let me describe who these people are. So Glenn Greenwald, originally from New York. Where is he now? He's not in the United States anymore. He's not in any Anglo-American alliance country anymore. He is in Brazil. Where is Sarah Harrison, the journalist who helped rescue Edward Snowden from Hong Kong, one of our people, and get him to Moscow, stay 40 days in the Moscow airport and make sure his asylum was protected in Russia? Well, she's from the UK. She's now in effective exile in Berlin. Where is Laura Poitras, originally from New York? She's now also in effective exile in Berlin. US filmmaker, done many great films. Making a film about Edward Snowden was one of the first people that Edward Snowden contacted. Jacob Appelbaum works for the Tor Project, Seattle in California. He's been a close advisor to us over a number of years. He's also done some Edward Snowden articles. Where is he? He's now also in Berlin. So, in fact, there's an exodus of national security reporters. National security reporters are a new type of refugee. And this is a wave that is spread out. But unlike in previous generations where a country has started to go bad, where one power group has started to gain too much power and too much dominance, that wave that is spread out into countries which are more amenable to them is able to continue work. And in fact, is able to continue work in a way that is even more powerful than they were once able to do. They are not in a situation where they have to be terrified all the time. anymore unless they travel. Whereas locally in the United States, of course, they could be arrested
From Australia.
at any moment. So in fact, the fear that has driven them out has also had a counterproductive effect. It has created nucleuses of strong reportage and communications because the communications can come back in. So you look, Brazil is now one of the countries most concerned with this National Security Agency issue and the global surveillance that is occurring now. And it is trying to present a proposal in April to wrest control of ICANN, the organization that sort of controls all the internet domain names, from the United States and into the international community. Germany, where Jacob and Laura and Sarah are, well, it is the other very strong country. Why is it so strong? Well, because those people are there and are reporting from there. So I see this as quite a positive phenomenon, that where once people would have been completely crushed and not been able to work anymore, they are able to use these basic tenements of enlightenment, basic tenements of classical liberalism, freedom of movement, freedom of communication, and international human rights in relation to asylum, to continue working and in fact act some kind of restraint to the growing militarism in the United States and the UK that previously wouldn't have had such an effective constraint. And with these people engaged in their work to build up a broader nucleus of which this incredible audience is clearly part of. Earlier on, there was sort of an intimation in the question, what's life like for us here, and how physically difficult it is, and so on. Okay, yes, it is difficult, but I am able to continue working, and to some degree, I exist in a situation which is every national security reporter's dream, which is to be in a land without police, in a land without subpoenas. In this embassy, the British police cannot come in, the Ecuadorian police cannot come in, no subpoenas can come in. It is, to a degree, a no man's land as far as coercion is concerned. Okay, do we have Ben yet?
We have well, there was audio for a bit, and then you go on, but I have a question, which is, talk about how you started WikiLeaks, a premeditated organization to leak secrets versus Manning and Snowden acting alone. When did you realize that an organization needed to exist to do this?
Okay, so the question is, kind of, when did I start WikiLeaks, a premeditated policy of opening up governments as opposed, in general, as opposed to an individual act that many brave whistleblowers have engaged in. Well, you know, I've kind of been involved in this business for almost 20 years. Back in the 1990s, we fought something called the Crypto Wars, which some of you might remember. And that was an attempt by the FBI, National Security Agency, and all the Wassenaar Pact countries, basically the Western military countries, to try and outlaw cryptography, to prevent export of cryptography, to introduce special backdoor chips that the phone carriers would have to have if you wanted an encrypting phone to use. And what was that about? That was about maintaining surveillance hegemony, maintaining the government's ability to spy on everyone all the time, because they thought that cryptography would threaten it. And whereas we saw that actually cryptography would liberate people in a very important way. Yes, perhaps it would assist some criminals, but there's other ways of going after them which were used before their electronic communication. But it would liberate activists and journalists and various people in different countries trying to act in a manner to hold the state to account or just to organize their lives. And eventually we won that battle. And we saw how we won it and the importance of revealing information in that battle. And then in Australia, I was involved in starting one of the first 3 internet service providers in Australia. And we became famous as the publisher of last resort. Where people were being censored around the world, they would come to us, and we would publish their material, from Scientology to, in fact, some leaked information. And the result of that, seeing how that acted in practice and through some human rights work and journalism work, it became clear to me that one of the best ways to achieve justice is to expose injustice. And you can be simplistic about it, which some people are. It's not that when you expose something automatically there is justice, but rather you create a general deterrent for anyone believing that they can construct an unjust plan in a serious manner, which affects a lot of people, and get away with it. That there's always a really decent chance that they're not going to get away with it, and then the people who are affected by it can take some kind of action, and there's no confidence in the power being deployed, no confidence in injustice. And you can go, well, okay, well, don't people then just not do things on paper? Won't they simply take everything offline and they just act in whispers? Yeah, they do sometimes do that. But the problem is you can't systematize injustice unless you can put it down on paper in such a way that all your mid-level managers and your grunts working at the coalface will have very precise instructions, because if there's not, if everything's done through oral mechanisms, you end up with something like Chinese whispers. And when we published the main manuals for Guantanamo Bay, it really struck me that in fact here was proof that this theory was correct. There in those Guantanamo Bay procedure manuals, in black and white, is, well, hide things from the Red Cross, fabricate information for the Red Cross, to be carried out, of course, by Guantanamo Bay prison guards. And that's the only way you can force people to carry out those things, is by putting it down in paper.
Okay, next question says, post-NSA revelations, do you think the World Wide Web is threatened? Is the firewall of China going to become the norm? Are we in danger of losing the worldwide part of the internet?
Well, look, just this week, General Alexander, making comments at George Washington University, said that in the next few weeks, there would be a bill before Congress, a media leaks bill, to try and stop publication of material about the National Security Agency. And that needed to go through first, and then on the back of it, new cyber terrorism legislation, unquote, could come. So there is a really serious attempt to try and stop these revelations and others, and introduce a new international regime of censorship. We can see some aspects of that in something called the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Arrangement, a new international intellectual property and trade agreement which covers 40% of GDP, including the United States. So yeah, there's a question, what are the new standards going to be of our new society? Are they going to be the worst aspects of the United States, the worst aspects of China, or are they going to be the best? Because now that the internet has merged with human society, and human society is merged with the internet, the laws that apply to the internet apply to human society. This penetration of the internet by the National Security Agency and GCHQ is the penetration of our civilian society. It means that there has been a militarization of our civilian space, a military occupation of the internet, our civilian space. It's a very serious phenomenon. We and others are fighting back against it in a serious manner. There is a question whether the Barack Obama administration is at all serious, and who really wears the pants in the administration. Is it the intelligence agencies, or is it the civilian part of that administration? Why do I say that? Well, we know what happens when a government gets serious. Someone is fired, someone is forced to resign, someone is prosecuted, a big criminal investigation is launched, or budgets are cut. And none of those 5 things have happened in the last 8 months since the Edward Snowden revelations. None of them. That means that the Obama administration's response is not serious. Is that because the issue is not serious, or because the public is not picking it up, or because the media is not picking it up? No. We all know that, broadly speaking, the media is behind some kind of constraint. They weren't originally, but now they perceive a self-interest from their proprietors who feel threatened, from journalists themselves who feel threatened by this, and readership who want something done. But there has been no significant response. And I think that's quite concerning in that, okay, the reform doesn't appear like it's going to come out of government. On the other hand, it is also indicative. It is indicative of the power of what we would traditionally call in academia the deep state, the power of the intelligence agencies and military contractors in the United States. What would happen tomorrow if Barack Obama said, I'm going to disband the NSA, or I'm going to disband the CIA? While on paper he has that power, we all know that that is impossible. It is simply impossible for that to occur, that he would be rolled. Well, how would he be rolled? Well, people would come up with lots of dirt. They would attack him in some political manner. The National Security Agency, having intercepted all this information, has dirt on everyone. Congress perhaps would impeach him for some act or another. He would be found to have committed some criminal act. So it is not possible. There does not appear to be proper civilian oversight, proper civilian power in reining in these agencies. And that's not a surprise. They're secretive. They have budgets in the tens to $100 billion. They have a big patronage network. They are hard to control. So we have to do something about it. All of us have to do something about it. And you might think that you're small and insignificant, and how could you possibly do something about this situation? What I've just described is a movement towards a serious form of surveillance totalitarianism, and we know once we have that, if history is any guide, we get the other forms of totalitarianism as well. So how can individuals do something about it? Well, you've got no choice. It's not the case anymore that you can kind of hide from the state, that you can keep your head down, that you can hope through sucking up or being innocuous, you can be spared. Arbitrary injustice is arbitrary. Even General Petraeus, the head of the CIA, was knocked off as a result of what's going on. A consummate insider, someone who should be able to have all the protection for themselves. They were not able to protect themselves. With all these records of communication being collected and stored in a permanent manner, with the indexing of that material becoming more and more sophisticated as time goes by, the mining of it, the putting together associations of individuals, their attitudes, psychological algorithms that try and predict people's behavior, the entire community structure of the United States, which has been stolen by looking at who communicates with whom and how often and when. You can get the connectivity between individuals, the degree of their friendships and relationships for the entire United States. We are now all involved in it. We are all part of what we would traditionally call the state, whether we like it or not. So we have no choice but to attempt to manage the behavior of the state that we have been forced to be part of. And that includes managing what laws and activities are acceptable. And we are in a position where we are finally able to do that in some ways. That there is a new body politic that has been developing over the last few years, whenever you put people together and you create some space, if you throw them all together on some island, they start to discuss amongst themselves, what do we like, what do we don't like, what do we find acceptable, what do we find legitimate, what can we tolerate, what are our hopes and what are our dreams.
Good. All right. One second, we lost you.
We now are constructing a new society or a new network, a new way of being, and it's not very
I'm
conscious.
texting them now.
I don't know, he's writing something. He sent the question, which is, oh yes, suck. Oh well, let me just back up. We lost audio, he says.
Do we have audio now? Can people raise their hands?
Yeah.
Okay, we have audio now. Great. Great.
Do you want me to read the next question?
Yeah. Well, just a few weeks ago, it came out that GCHQ is spying on us. It was in the Edward Snowden documents and NSA, of course. So we often joke here when we have these sorts of problems that we have inferior quality interception around the embassy.
Okay, so next question says, oh yes, Zuckerberg says we are post-privacy. Do you think we should be living in an all-open society, i.e. should everything be leaked?
Well, sentences like those constructed by Zuckerberg are there to feed their revenue model, but they're there also to obscure what is going on. What is going on is an unprecedented theft of wealth from the majority of the population to those people who already have a lot of power. So, you know, the National Security Agency, GCHQ, those organizations and their contractors are joining together and lifting up. The result of that is that they are coming together, but they're also lifting off the rest of the population. They're doing that in part by stealing information from all of us to them, and knowledge is power, and so as a result they're getting more power, and as a result there's greater power inequality. The question about what is happening in the other direction is interesting. Of course, WikiLeaks as an organization specializes in the other direction, specializes in going after those institutions which themselves accumulate a lot of knowledge in order to increase their power, and reversing this process and taking knowledge about how the world actually works, how these organizations are working, and putting it back into our common intellectual record, into our history, into our common environment upon which we all draw, and that empowers us. At the same time, there is a lateral transfer of information going on. The lateral transfer of information is between all of us. So we are educating each other at a speed which is unprecedented. I mean, those people who are over the age of 30 will know that if you go back 10 years and you think about 20-year-olds 10 years ago versus 20-year-olds today, 20-year-olds today are so much more worldly and educated than they were 10 years ago. And that is largely due to this lateral, horizontal transfer of information, and perhaps a little bit by organizations like WikiLeaks taking information from very powerful groups and spreading it down. Is there another question?
Not right now. Not right now.
He's typing. Okay, he's typing.
Yeah.
Old school.
Take some questions from Twitter. Any upcoming leaks? Yes.
Yes, there's important upcoming material. I don't like to give time frames because it tends to give the opponents of that material too much notice about how to prepare their spin lines. It's actually something quite interesting when you deal with organizations like the Washington Post, and even some of the best reporters there, like Dana Priest, when she's publishing something on the CIA, goes to them beforehand and says, just as a favor, well, you have some comment on this, just giving you the heads up, keeps the relationship going. But I don't think it's right, in fact, to give the alleged perpetrator the heads up before the alleged victims,
Sure.
to give the organisation with lots of power the heads up, because you know what they do with it. What they do with it is they simply prepare to counter-spin the revelation that you're giving.
Anything related to the Ukraine?
So there's a question about Ukraine. Well, Ukraine is very dear to my heart. I have spent time in the Ukraine. I have extremely good friends there. I even helped build a good friend's dacha in the Ukraine. And so I'm familiar with the Western Ukrainian sentiment, their desire for independence, which all people of one language group or another tend to have. Those desires were betrayed in the Orange Revolution, and that's their feeling as well, back in 2005. The quest for dominance of the Ukraine, either by Russia or by NATO, has been going on for a long time now. And the Ukraine is a bridge between the parts of Western Europe and Russia. The understanding that they were betrayed in the Orange Revolution 2005 is something that it affected a lot of people in Western Ukraine. That the pro-democracy activists, they thought, ended up being the most corrupt people in the country. And so you ended up with someone like Ikanovich, who himself appears to have been corrupt, I don't know for sure, but certainly became very wealthy. But who in fact wasn't liked by Russia, wasn't liked by Putin. In fact, the previous prime minister, whose name I've temporarily forgotten, Yulia Tymoshenko, was much more liked by Moscow. The strategy of the Ukraine, the proper strategy, in my mind, has always been to try and milk concessions from its eastern and western neighbours, milk concessions from Europe and milk concessions from Russia. And it had been doing that in a reasonably successful way, in some kind of bidding war for associations with the EU versus Russia. At the same time, however, you have had the United States spending literally with its partners billions over the last 10 years in trying to pull the Ukraine into its sphere of orbit. And we have to remember that NATO expenditure is 20 times that of Russian expenditure on military and intelligence. And so the Polish intelligence services have been there destabilizing matters. The Swedish government has had a lot of intervention. The US government has had a lot of intervention. And the results that you see now, in some sense, is easily predictable. In the Sevastopol and the Crimea are of such geostrategic significance to Russia, namely giving them access to the Mediterranean, that it has been something that Russia has tried to keep control of for more than 120 years. And it is geopolitically utterly intolerable for Sevastopol to fall into the hands of another nation, to fall into the hands of NATO. That is something that the Russians would see as something like an existential threat. So they're willing to pour immense resources and risk into retaining control of the Crimea. Anyway, so I think the outcome might be all right. I think the outcome will probably be that Russia will retain control of Crimea, its bases in Crimea, even if Crimea may become autonomous, that the Ukraine will be propped up a lot by the West, at least the Western Ukraine, and economic development might occur. You've got largely a very bad cabinet now in the Ukraine, with some really quite questionable figures in that cabinet. And I think once again Western Ukraine will feel that it has been betrayed by many members of that cabinet. And I don't think they can last that long, actually, some of those members, and there will be a reversion to a more cabinet that is more tolerable, I hope, to the majority of people in Ukraine.
Is Greenwald's the Intercept mark of success for WikiLeaks? Is the press getting braver or more brave?
The Intercept, well, Glenn is a brave reporter. I think strategically, in relation to what Glenn is doing, I might have done things slightly differently, but we run an organization. Glenn is an individual reporter. And I find it hard to imagine that any reporter in the United States could have done better or been braver than Glenn Greenwald. What I find interesting about The Intercept and First Look is that you've got Pierre Omidyar, who's worth $8 billion, who made his money with eBay, who owns PayPal, someone who has all the money in the world at their disposal, who is free to do just about anything they like, they thought. Someone who has liberty as a result of money, who has lawyers to take care of legal problems, who has private investigators to take care of intelligence-related problems, who has donations to Congress to take care of political problems. But despite all that money, I believe that Pierre Omidyar has genuinely seen that there is not even liberty for people who have $8 billion anymore. That the threat of the surveillance complex is so severe that it is even a threat to cashed up American industrialists that are not part of the security system. Of course, you don't see the chairman of the board at Northrop Grumman or General Dynamics or SAIC or any of the other US intelligence contractors starting something like that. You don't see them doing it because they're able to work inside the system. They're able to pull the levers of power in the new developing militarism to protect their own personal interests and those of their family. But cashed up industrialists that are not part of the military intelligence system are not able to do that. And this translation between power and money, actually, often the exchange rate is not that good. That unless you're involved in the system of coercive force, military deployment, intelligence, or have strong access to the levers of power in the United States and Washington, that with money alone you don't get power. And so I think Omidyar is a symptom of a new elite in the United States that feels like it is genuinely threatened by what is going on with the National Security Agency, and that's important.
So now we're going to read a Twitter question to the audience. So they ask you to pause while they do that, and then they will send it to us. Maybe just say, so you're going to read the question.
Sorry for difficulties, guys.
Apparently, I'm reading it. There's a question being read out to me from Twitter.
So the question here is, Julian, if you could go back to the beginning of your cause, knowing what you know now.
To the beginning of your case, knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently? Or what would you do differently?
So the question is, essentially, what would I do differently? Well, it's just a few things. It's interesting when you find yourself in this position. Yes, I've been involved in this business for almost 20 years in one way or another. But it's such a high level of conflict with the United States and its allies, as opposed to the various countries in Africa that we had been exposing, or China. A degree of pressure and perceived pressure rained down on our organization and me personally. That caused a change in people's behavior. And it meant, for example, that that individuals that normally you could trust suddenly couldn't be trusted. Yes, the FBI has tried to bribe our people, it's stopped people at airports, it's flown private jets of FBI officers undercover into Iceland, it's done all sorts of things. But in a way, you can kind of predict that might happen. But where you enter into a new country and a new social network, as I did here in London. I'm an Australian from a country that is similar in some social respects to the United States. It is an anti-class country. it doesn't appreciate manners and class system, and it feels that something about that is foreign to it. And here in London there exists a kind of class system that is pretty distasteful. But I needed new allies quickly. And unfortunately, those lawyers advised me to stay in this country, which was completely crazy. But, well, if I had left the UK, which is what our internal advice was, I would no longer be their clients. And as a result, they wouldn't have a famous client in a famous situation and wouldn't have had the money from that experience. So I suppose the big lessons are actually not what you might think, not the geostrategic lessons, not the lessons about intelligence agencies or how institutions actually behave. We were ready for that fight. We had been geared up for that fight for a long time. It was more the lessons of how people that you think should be on your side behave when the pressure gets really high.
What do you see as future targets that need to be made public? Do you think SCOTUS and World Court hearings should be public?
I can't second.
What do you see as future targets that need to be made public? Do you think SCOTUS and World Court hearings should be public?
So the question was, should the Supreme Court of the United States and World Court hearings be public? Well, most Supreme Court of the United States hearings are public, so I'm not sure where that comes from. And the World Court, I don't know. There is something in these new international trade agreements, which are there for geopolitical purposes in part, to act as this kind of block of 40% of GDP to sort of surround China, surround it with a new international legal regime to block it off. Those have legal mechanisms that come out of them, new international tribunals, new international court systems, for which there is not an appeal for human rights, for which there is no guarantee for those people who are affected that are not parties to join them. So yeah, that's a problem.
What do you see as future targets that need to be made public?
The question is, what are future targets that need to be made public? Well, look, thus far, less than 1% of the alleged Edward Snowden material has been released to the public. Less than 1%. In relation to the State Department, we released a lot of important material, more than 251,000 cables, but it amounts to, if you include the top secret material, something like 10 to 15% of the material over the last 15 years collected by the State Department. We need these great revelations in relation to the CIA, in relation to the DIA, in relation to GCHQ, in relation to the Chinese Public Security Bureau, in relation to the FSB. We're all actually living in a world that we don't understand. Before all this material came out, about Cablegate or what we did with the Iraq War or Edward Snowden's revelations about the National Security Agency, take your mind back. We were going about our business, living in what we thought was the world. But we were wrong. We weren't actually living in the world. We were living into some fictitious representation of what we thought was the world. And we are still living in that fictitious representation because we have not seen these grand disclosures from these other organizations to understand the true history of us. So we are living in a sort of illusion where the true history of the world, the true nature of our environment, the true nature of the way human institutions behave and the alliances and power structures and what we should do and what we shouldn't do is all obscured by some kind of fog. We are walking around constantly through this fog where we can't even see the ground, but we think we can see the ground, but we're wrong. And every so often a clearing in the fog happens when there's one of these grand disclosures. And we see the ground and we're surprised. So what does that tell you about all the other places that we look around and try to see, actually, it's largely illusory.
Are you afraid?
Well, there's a question whether I'm afraid. Well, I'm a normal person. In fact, our Weiwei has put it this way when people say, well, he's brave. He says, no, actually, in some ways, he feels the fear more keenly. Perhaps in some ways, I also feel the fear more keenly, and therefore I can see where things are going in different ways, and I'm concerned about it. And so that is why I act. The real issue with, well, I like to define courage as not the absence of fear. Only a fool has no fear. Rather, courage is seeing fear and still proceeding anyway. Seeing fear, developing a plan of how to delicately balance all the factors in your environment and steering ahead anyway. For WikiLeaks as an organization, it's kind of interesting to take stock of where we are, because, these large power groups, they actually don't need any power at all. All they need is the perception of power. The perception of power and the perception of an ability to strike back and create fear in others is all that is needed to rule and get what they want. They don't actually need to be able to kill you. They just need to make you think that they can kill you. And that is enough to alter your behavior in a radical way. So if we pull back for a minute and think, well, WikiLeaks is a small publisher. And what happened to that small publisher when it does what all publishers say that they will do? Publish fearlessly, publish frankly, not censor, put their readers first. What happens when you actually do that? Well, okay, you end up in some giant international fight. And were we destroyed as a result of that?
Thank you.
No, we weren't destroyed as a result of that. So the Pentagon in 2010 demanded, after we released proof demonstrating more than 20,000 people killed in Afghanistan, more than 100,000 people killed in Iraq, that we destroy all our previous publications coming from the Pentagon, that we destroy our upcoming publications, and we cease dealing with US military whistleblowers. And we said, no, we promise not to do that. We are not going to do that. It is not right to do that. And there was a threat, or else we would be compelled to do so. The word compelled used, and we said no. The Pentagon said that in a 40-minute press conference to the entire world, that we would be destroyed unless we performed a particular action, and we said no. And we haven't censored any of that material. And then we went on to do it with the State Department, the same thing. State Department accused us of, if we published, we would be committing espionage, a conspiracy to commit espionage. But we proceeded anyway. We published all that material. We didn't censor anything. We have not retrospectively censored anything. And now, with the Edward Snowden situation, we went head-to-head with the National Security Agency in the largest intelligence manhunt that the world has ever seen. And we won. And we're a small publisher. And it's not that we're especially brilliant. It's not that we are a strange thing in the world. It is that that we simply try and we test. And we do not accept the appearance of fear. We push back against it and see what is the reality. And yes, as a result, we ended up with lots of legal court cases, and we ended up with a banking blockade that attempted to wipe out 95% of income. But we have defeated that banking blockade in court, in the European Parliament, and elsewhere. We are one of the few media organizations that is in the black. We didn't fire a single one of our people. Not a single person was fired as a result of this almighty conflagration. And we continue on publishing and even expanding slightly over time. So I hope that gives people courage that, in fact, with a bit of help from your friends, with some clear thinking, and with a lot of dedication, in fact, you can come to a position where you can stand up, yes, against these awful, fearful, great powers. You can outmaneuver them. You can do it.
Is what would you tell kids about sharing their information online? We're almost out of time, so try to keep it short.
Okay, so what would I tell kids about sharing the information online? Well, you know, it's in your permanent record. Your permanent record in one state, another state, they all trade them now. Well, many of them trade these records with each other. So you just need to be aware that that is something that you are giving to, you know, the teachers, the government, to your future self in 20 years' time, and to whatever kind of strange construction is going to be developed politically, internationally, as time goes by. It's quite unpredictable.
Okay.
We are at a crossroads where down this path is, yes, a real kind of dystopia. No idea where it's heading, but if you're able to suck all the information in about human civilization and work with it, and you're able to blackmail or defame any particular person and keep accurate real-time information about people, well, of course, it permits a more coercive atmosphere to develop. On the other hand, it seems that a new international politic amongst people is developing, and alliances between some states, say in Latin America, that are affected by this, companies that are affected by it, even billionaires that are affected by it. And that new developing alliance is producing a market for cryptography, for political associations that act to retard that tendency. And it is the battle between these two groups that is being borne out. That is the heat that you're seeing in the moment. It is a result of these two groups clashing together. And we're not certain which one is going to win, right? But we know that if we don't make this one win, if we don't make the sectors of the society that want to support liberty and freedom of communication, prevent censorship, then we're going to end up in a place. So I think that we have no choice following this.
Do you want it?
Okay. Questions about advice for entrepreneurs in the audience. Well, so I've been following the development that's happening with anti-surveillance and new political institutions across national boundaries, and this soft.
Julian, what? I have this right here for you.
But the last year has seen such an explosion, and it's not quite publicly visible. These are all startup companies, sort of in a venture capital phase, but I'm really quite hard. You can see the development of Bitcoin, for example. Not the currency itself, that's not interesting.
Honey.
What is interesting is the basic underlying technology is a way of achieving international consensus about the economic history of a particular part of the world. And onto that is coming other currencies now. There's now about 70 different Bitcoin type currencies. So that's here to stay. And then a full financial stack. There's going to be hedge funds and banks and new forms of loans and the ways to enforce contracts without going to court, but mathematically enforce contracts. So that's a very interesting and fast-paced development. I understand that Eric Schmidt spoke yesterday. Okay, so there's now something like a million Google phones turned on for the first time per day, a million Android phones. And how does Google know that? Because it is collecting the information every time they're turned on. That's a big problem, that there is a single group that is able to capture that much information. You might think that's a surveillance nightmare. We not only have to put up with the NSA and its contract, the GCHQ intercepting all this stuff. There are big companies like Google who are in the business of intercepting, collecting as much information about people as possible. You are all the product that is sold to advertisers and perhaps others. However, think about it. 1 million people interacting with each other at speed. So you can intercept them all, but can you actually predict their behavior? This is an extremely complex dynamic system that is leaping from place to place with views of people changing, political alliances changing really quickly.
I know.
So in terms of entrepreneurship, what can be done to resist the militaristic tendencies, the authoritarian tendencies that are happening in the West? Well, developing systems that promote this fluidity of interaction between people is something that can be done. And of course, the cryptography market is booming.
This has been interesting.
Kind of. I mean,
Just wait.
he just kind of goes on and on about stuff.
Bye everyone.
Hi, thank you everyone. Sorry about the audio difficulties. But you got to watch me text, I guess, on stage. Thank you.
All right. This is kind of interesting. I mean, yeah, he goes on. So Ben barely talked at all. They had to end up. How do I stop this? I don't even know if I'm still going. Well, that's what she keeps saying. I really don't know how to stop recording. I don't even know if it actually was recording. To tell you the truth.
Take care.
Oh, I think that's what it is.